Greetings and welcome to Leagues Behind, the vodcast of the AGL that looks back at previous tournament offerings and puts them on the dissection table to see what went wrong, what went right with our past mechanics, and we take a view to fixing them up and seeing how we would offer these tournaments for the Arena Gauntlet League. Today, I am your host, Christopher York, the tournament organizer for the AGL, and today my very special guest is Caleb Guthrie. He is a longtime league member a longtime league committee member as well. So he's been there almost from the first Reddit push, I would say. Instrumental in coming up with several innovative league designs, and notably was the proponent of the Crimson Vow mechanics. So today, Caleb's going to walk us through the rules, give us the rationale for why things were the way they were, and then we're going to take a cold, hard look at the corpse of Crimson Vow. Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It is great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. This is long overdue. I mean, I was itching to have you on in season one, but the time wasn't right? You were more of a player back then. You didn't have the keys to the kingdom at that time, but here's where you really got your hands dirty in the muck, so to speak, and came up with a real cracker for Crimson Vow. So I couldn't be happier to have you on, and there's no one I'd rather have here. We just finished the first part of our double feature on Midnight Hunt, and just to sort of segue into this league, we should highlight the fact that Midnight Hunt had a very simple, almost non-existent mechanic, which was just putting people into factions for the purposes of winning a side pot, and the mechanic was invisible to a lot of players, difficult to engage with, and then towards the end of the tournament it became too obvious who was a werewolf and who wasn't. So it wasn't really, it wasn't a knock out of the park, but I mean, as we pointed out in our conversation previous, it was a bit of a palate cleanser after the demanding nature of the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms league over the summer, which was quite ambitious.
Yeah, definitely that was a piece of feedback we got at the time. The nature of AFR as nowadays I think it would fit in, pretty much without notice into some of the leagues that we run, but we were starting, from a backdrop of vanilla leagues being, just the way leagues worked. I think until if you run through the history, right? Like we don't even start introducing these league specific mechanics until Kaladesh Remastered, and I think that was only because people were, had a lot of us had already drafted Kaladesh.
Right.
And then
it was adding spice to a reheated dish, essentially.
Exactly. Like Kaldheim's got nothing that I remember. Chaos has got nothing that I remember. Strixhaven was a faction league, and that was a huge success, and that's going to be important for when we get to Vow. AFR was a huge step forward in complexity and mechanical depth, and it had paths you could pick and loot tables you could roll on, and it was a lot.
Trading.
Yeah, trading was a mistake. Everything else, I think, we would be happy to run now, but yeah, trading didn't live up to the hype, and it wasn't worth it, unfortunately. But the point was, we got a lot of that feedback thing. This was a big step forward, and people who were unhappy with that sort of thing and wanted a lower intensity, lower commitment league experience were pretty vocal about that. And this showed up. There was a guy on our Reddit recruitment posts who was like, every time you play a match this league, you have to fill out 3 different Google forms. It's impossible to understand. So we deliberately scaled it back for Midnight Hunt, and then for Crimson Vow, we tried to find, I think, more of a happy medium. And right. Strixhaven, I think, was, by consensus at the time, our most successful league so far. So we thought, okay, this is a good chance to do another faction set. It's a Vampire Wedding was the flavor of the set. There's the Markovs and the Volderans. They're getting married. Olivia Volderan is marrying, I don't know if it's actually Edgar Markov or not, but I can't name any other Markov, so I'm going to assume it's Edgar Markov.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Thank you. And we thought, okay, great, there's Markovs and Volderans. Let's work with that. And so this gave, I think, a good opportunity for me to try to pitch an idea I had way back before Crimson Vow came out. In fact, the genesis of this idea dates back. I've got the screenshot in one of these documents to October 2020, which was, I think, a full year before Crimson Vow came out. Let me actually look that up right now. Yeah, Crimson Vow released in November 2021. So yeah, basically a full year beforehand. Although it was initially pitched as some sort of zombie mechanic where some players start off as infected, and
Right.
if you lose to an infected, you become infected, and that was sort of the core idea there. There was just like a hook for some reward or some side prizes or something. But we thought, okay, let's vampires do this too, right? Like,
Yes.
if you get bitten by a vampire, you become a vampire. That's pretty core to the vampire mythos.
Yes.
Let's try and play into that.
And I think that we were hungry for a faction league that was also split the player base in half, but was more transparent, more easy to interact with, and something that players could kind of, I don't want to, forgive the pun, sink their teeth into, and follow, right? And I think this works. So do you want to talk us through the specifics of how this functioned?
Absolutely. So to make this work, there was a lot of wrangling with the details to achieve a couple specific goals, which I'll get into after I've done explaining what we settled on. So the way we wound up running it was people started as human, and then at the end of week 1, so after 5 matches have been played, the 2 highest ranking people on the standing sheet would retroactively become the progenitors of the houses. And this was in contrast to other faction leagues where to be a dean in Strixhaven, or later on like a Khan in Tarkir, you had to do well in prior leagues. This was rewarding performance in the league itself. And what wound up happening was you had 2 people, each of them had 5-0'd. The 2 people who 5-0'd would become the progenitors. That wound up being Chris R. and Chris and Ryan, Chris Sinkwater and Ryan, whose arena name I'm blanking on, but who's been they've both been around still to this day. The Slickness, yeah, I think
Ryan D.
But yeah, both long-standing league members. As it turned out, I think we definitely high-rolled that one, right? Like we got a one and done as a progenitor. It's a bit rougher. That was a risk we ran.
Yes.
But it wound up being that 2, long-standing and like very invested members wound up being the progenitors. And then at the start of week 2, the factions each had 6 people, the progenitors and the 5 people they beat.
Yep.
So they were starting on equal footing, and then they grew from there. At the end of every week, if you had been beaten by or rather, the first vampire you got beaten by, if you were a human, that would convert you into a vampire of that faction. So the factions grew through the success of the players in the faction, and that sort of.
Yeah, just to fill that in a little bit, the mechanic was.
But the idea was that would eventually convert just about everybody, because it was really hard to get eliminated without losing to a vampire, right? Like you would have to either deliberately only play other humans or lose really quickly. Like if you went 0-10 in the first 2 weeks, you could probably do it. But by the end, I've got this on the sheet here, only 3 people died while still humans. And that was a big design goal, actually, is that everyone would eventually get sorted into a faction.
Yeah.
And then once the factions were sorted, there was a pretty major side pot.
30%
among the factions.
30% of the total prize pool.
Yeah, 20%, which was wound up being.
Oh yeah.
30%. Geez.
Oh yeah, no.
How much
30%. You're right. So there's 20% between all of the faction members. 2% went to the last human player remaining in the tournament. 2% went to the human player who defeated the most vampire players. 2% went to the progenitor vampire whose house the league winner is aligned with. 2% went to the non-progenitor vampire with the greatest number of conversions of humans to vampires, and 2% went to the vampire player who eliminated the most vampire players from their enemy houses. So a lot of like sub achievements kind of baked into the reward scheme.
Yeah. So 2%, we had about 100 players, $10 each. That winds up being $20, right? Like that's, more than you get for top 16ing, but that's about the floor of, if you make the top 8 and go 0-3, that's about what you get.
Right.
So I think that hit the right number. Like we got that part right, where it was like, it wasn't overshadowing the main goal of the league to win a bunch of matches on top 8 and then win the draft. But it was still like the biggest thing you go for once you got your money back. It's like, okay, I can, and there were players who did this. We'll get into this. There were players who were like, I will be the last human. I will, as the human, defeat the most vampires. And those are two very different play styles, which I
Yeah.
thought was neat.
And it was great that
The,
we had the 96 players, because I think with a smaller league, the whole infection mechanic wouldn't have had a chance to shine. But this was a pretty healthy number for us. And when you were talking about the slickness, Ryan D being one of the progenitors, I had him mistaken for a second with Ryan W, who won this league. Just as a
it's true.
quick.
It was a good league for Ryans.
Yeah. No, but to go back to that, yeah, to have the progenitors be selected by the performance in week one, just a great spin on assigning faction deans or dons or captains, right? Whereas you might have somebody who, I don't know, just historically have done well, but they're not really super active on the server presently, or someone whose star has faded since they got those other performances in the past. To have it sort of tied into week one performances, I think added a lot of drama and expectation to those proceedings that are normally reserved for week six matches, right? So I like the way that selection process fed into more interest in week one play.
It's true that was a benefit of it, but the funny part is that was not at all the problem we were trying to solve, right? Like
Mhm.
we felt, as I recall, at least I felt like we were sort of sacrificing the engagedness of the progenitors on average to fix another problem with the mechanic, which was if you start this in week one, where let's say you just picked two progenitors, if one of them goes 5-0 and one of them goes, like 1-4, the team match is over. Like the way in which the
Because it
faction
snowballs.
size
Yeah.
snowball, yeah, exactly. The way in which they snowball with the infection mechanic, if you have that much variability in early performance, it decides the result before most players have an opportunity to take part in the mechanic. And that's something which we really couldn't have. And I spent a lot of time essentially running simulations of various versions of this rule set on past leagues, and then on just like pure generated like random leagues where every match is 50-50 and so on, just to hit a couple of goals. The constraints I wanted were, I wanted the conversion to take a few weeks, but be mostly done by week 4, maybe a couple survivors into week 5. Because that's the point at which most players die in the league, right? Like if like half leagues still unconverted by week 6, that's to me a failure, because they don't get to take part at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if the league all gets converted in week 2, to me that's sort of, you're under, it's not as much of a failure, but you're still sort of under delivering on the promise of, the infection being a meaningful thing you have to care about. Like
Yeah.
if you're trying to optimize your faction gameplay.
Yeah, and all credit to
so-
you for this was your labor of love, right? It was your passion project, and so kudos to you for mathing it out so hard in advance of the tournament. To get these numbers right and to have it come out as well as it did.
So the funny thing is, the solution we wound up going with, where you retroactively pick the progenitors after week 1 has happened, was not at all my idea. That fully goes to Zeke, Mr. Smarmy Platypus, who
No
just
kidding.
like threw this out into the public league crafting thread, which back in the day we used to do a lot more of this stuff in the public channels than
Yes.
than happens now, where it's
Yes.
all secret and hidden.
Gladiator battles in the round, we used to call them, I think, because people would, we get passionate, very
Yeah.
passionate, and we're talking about
Like-
snowballing, right? If you had a position that was very popular or unpopular, people piling on in the public rules design threads was more common. It was a less civilized time, Caleb, I think.
It definitely had, when you get to SNC and when you get to double Eldraine, like you're going to get to the leagues which sort of killed that for, understandable reasons. But back in the day, I think there was still enough like collective credibility of league committee that we could have these discussions in public and have people poke holes in things and still, feel like we could announce actual rule sets with the buy-in of the community, even if they disagreed with some of the details.
Right.
so yeah, Zeke actually suggested it with like a disclaimer of like he would kind of not like this all that much. But it wound up, I think, kind of saving the mechanic because if we don't have this sort of guarantee and like this way to sort of defer, this way to reduce variance, then well, to be fair, it was already like not a particularly close faction battle. It is a part of the unfortunate thing that sort of happened, but it would have been, on average, a lot less close than it was. Um, the other discussion we had in public actually involved you,
Oh,
because as I recall, I had to fight you pretty hard to have this be a two faction league as opposed to a four faction league or some other number of factions.
yeah.
And I'm looking at these old discussions we had, and I still don't understand particularly why you were set on that idea, but
Well, again, so
um,
let me try to run it back because as soon as you
yeah, go
said
for it.
that, some ancient reptile part of my brain bucked. It came back to life, and I'm like, what if we did this with four factions or five factions, Caleb? What if we did it? And I guess
Yeah.
the thing for me, right? Like my worry back then, if I recall correctly, and my worry now immediately upon hearing the imbalance between two teams is that if we have five or four teams, the chances are that there are going to be, more teams in contention, right? And therefore, there's not going to be anyone that runs away with it and makes it a non-contest. And so, I guess just by putting more teams in the mix, right, it sort of mitigates those possibilities, I think, and maybe makes it more, slightly more interesting for people. But of course, with Crimson Vow, I understand flavor-wise, we needed two factions. Maybe I was also stinging a little bit from like how poorly the mechanic from Midnight Hunt had gone over with just humans and werewolves, and I'm like, okay, so two factions, maybe that's going to be trouble. But yeah, I mean, eventually I caved for flavor reasons, and I think it turned out fine. Obviously, there's a runaway family, I guess, the runaway bride of the league. But I still think maybe with again, we're not talking about redesigning it because we're still digging into the history and the nitty gritty of the mechanics of the past league. But if we did this again, Caleb, don't you think four factions, five factions would really make it sing? No. No, you see.
No. And part of it is we've done five factions a bunch. Like WotC does a lot of five faction sets.
Not with an
They
infection
don't.
mechanic. Not with an infection mechanic.
I mean, this is true, but we haven't done a two faction league since this one, which, to be fair, is sort of an argument against it in some ways. But I think it was at least worth exploring, and this was the best set to give it a try.
I
Like, I'm
agree.
not sure if we had to pick another set, I'm not sure what we would pick.
Granted.
Um,
Granted.
and to your memories, I think on point because I'm looking at these discussions here on my screen, and you are like citing the poor reception of the Midnight Hunt mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
or at least like how recent it was as a reason to not do two sets, to not do two factions rather.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. So I mean, I think
so
that the reasoning probably. I haven't run my position back. I'm probably still entrenched in the
it's
same
2 years
way.
ago, Chris. Like we don't need to.
No, but I'm willing to.
We can talk
Look,
about other things.
we went with
Um,
it, and I think that all the same. You're right. This was the place to do it. It was way better than the human werewolf mechanic, right? Even if it led
that
to
much at least.
if it went to unbalanced factions, it was still for me. This feels like a much more successful run. It just feels like a
Yeah,
way more engaging and better mechanic than the hidden werewolf gang from Midnight Hunt.
it's even funny to look at now because the last faction league we did, like even a five faction one, was feels like a long time ago, right? Like it
Khans of
wasn't.
Tarkir, right?
Yeah, that's like six sets ago,
Uh
right?
huh.
And before that, it wasn't Neo, wasn't Mom, wasn't Shadows.
But
Did we
back to,
do one for SNC,
we
right?
did, yeah, we did one for SNC. That would have been the one before Khans, I think. And that, I mean, so just to go back
SNC was,
quickly,
yeah.
you talked about when we started introducing special rules to kind of flavor up the vanilla leagues, and it was about
I
Kaladesh
did that in the
Remastered.
first recording we deleted,
Yeah,
but I haven't actually talked about it in the one people are seeing now.
no, I know, but I'm referring to a previous conversation, right? So, we had to sort of spice that up because we're serving a reheated dish, right? So people have played Kaladesh, tons. And then we're getting the old cards released on Arena, so we run a tournament, but how do you spice it up? Well, we put some mechanics in that changed, I think, week 2, week 4, and week 6 league play. Here, with Khans of Tarkir, just to go back to the most recent faction league, we needed something else other than the faction mechanic. That tournament came off as very flat to me. And I know people were saying, well, we can't add, comeback packs from different sets because that's gonna. It's such a fragile ecosystem, Khans of Tarkir, that if we introduce any sort of foreign bacteria, it'll destroy the format.
These are conversations from after I'm not in that channel anymore.
No,
So
I know,
it's
but that was the discussion. But I do think we sort of we tread too lightly trying to preserve that hothouse flower, and I'm not sure it was worth it because, again,
there's definitely a point to be made about, like, to my mind, Khans is a pretty wildly overrated set by a lot of paper boomers, and I think those people are pretty heavily represented on the league committee. So, at the same time, I don't think introducing other sets is a fix for it particularly. That just sort of jumbles the mash. Like, if you have a very delicately flavored soup, right? Like, you're not improving it by dumping in a bunch of, like, mushrooms and, like, chili spices and ground beef. You're just sort of making a weird watered down chili at that point. Whereas if you actually go back to VOW, that was the other thing that was going on in VOW. Like,
Okay.
in terms of the actual gameplay experience, this was under the, more common back in the day, older vanilla rule set where you could take any standard pack. And at the time, the big bugaboo was Strixhaven.
Right.
People had like Strixhaven League decks. I still think when we ran that side event, which was like, bring your best top 8 deck, let's have a bracket and see whose deck was the strongest. Strixhaven was the most popular choice and won. And admittedly, that was pre-play boosters, but that was still, like, covering a couple years of Magic on Arena. The cumulative power of lesson learned as a mechanic once you got to critical mass was pretty real, and people were worried, and reasonably so, that VOW would just be Strixhaven set number 2 or number 3. I forget if we had Strixhaven in Midnight Hunt.
We've seen that a couple times, right?
In part because VOW had such crazy bombs at Rare, only I think 2 of the top 8 wound up having a lot of Strixhaven in their decks, which is actually an underrepresentation. If you go to the stat sheet on for the set, the stand-in sheet for the set, Crimson VOW packs are barely over half of the packs opened, and Strixhaven is at 30%, which is pretty wild. Like, that's, for one, that's there is definitely, like, a number of players who only took Strixhaven, and nobody was opening AFR, nobody was opening Kaldheim, nobody was opening Zendikar Remastered. Midnight Hunt was weirdly popular too. I don't really understand those people, but
they like spooky sets.
Sorry.
They liked the spooky sets, I guess.
I guess. I mean, Midnight Hunt, I have a big soft spot for that set. I think in part because of that, because that was the league I actually did the best in, I think, as a solo player. But yeah, so Crimson VOW, I meant to get this. The actual gameplay of the set kind of sucked. Right? It was not a good set, as most people would recall it. People, if you talk about Crimson VOW, most people's memories go to, like, losing to Toxrill the Corrosive, the slug that shrunk all your creatures and made more slugs, or losing to Dreadfeast Demon, where they just had, like, 4 flying 6/6s, and you died.
Yeah, there were a lot of feel bad rares. Yeah,
this was definitely, like, we did not have any mechanics that affected the gameplay in any substantial way, and that's, in large part, that's kind of the preference I have, is to sort of let the magic be the magic and have the mechanic be sort of outside of that, and try to keep it as simple and as sort of light, or at least conceptually simple as possible.
Yeah.
But definitely in this set, I think I get to claim that WotC let us down here, because people just really didn't like playing Crimson VOW by the end of it. Like, that was even on, like, if you asked me, like, hey, do you want to do a flashback of Crimson VOW, I'd, like, look for other things to do. I don't know if you feel the same way. But
well, do you think like Dustborn, is kind of Midnight Hunt and Crimson VOW Redux? Yeah, it's like we're taking
I
another
haven't got
swing.
tired of it yet. Well, we'll see how I'm feeling in a month, but I'm still enjoying it. Um, if I look at, I did this back for 20 when I was on league committee. I did these two state of the league documents for the 2 years I was there,
Hmm.
and for Crimson Vow, I've got a couple of good lessons. So
Yeah.
one of them was an implementation detail, which I think is probably the thing that we would try to do differently now
Hmm.
with our increased technical capability, which was the delayed conversion thing. So to be clear on this, when you got beaten by a vampire, you didn't actually become a Markov or Volderan until the league week ended, and then you got converted.
Yeah.
And that confused a lot of people. And that was, I sort of modeled it out whether that made a big difference in the projected growth of the two factions, and it slightly slowed them down, but not by much. It was fundamentally a technical limitation where we didn't have a way to automatically update people's, Discord roles.
Yeah. But that would be we
Um,
do that now, right? I guess probably.
I don't know if we've actually done specifically that, but there's enough smart people now on league committee and just in the league in general that I assume we could work it out if we had to.
Yeah, I think so.
Like back in the day, like we had Johnny knew how to work the spreadsheet, and I knew a little bit of the like coding to generate the packs, and and Francesca was around to actually handle the details of the pack generation. Like we were kind of everybody kind of when they're on the league committee, they push the ball forward slightly, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty cool to see how far things have come, but we were definitely like kind of at our capacity in terms of what we could handle, right? Like, um, the like AFR was like Johnny made like 4 spreadsheets for it or
Yeah.
something,
It
right?
was it was
And it was like
intense.
it took a ton of his time
Yeah.
to make work,
I
not
felt
just
like
from a lead design, but from a technical ability. Um,
just from his energy as a human too. I mean, I think that
yeah,
you put your shoulder behind this one, but I'm sure he was drained after
well,
Adventures in the
like
Forgotten Realms.
this is I will not lie, an advantage of the philosophy I had with designing leagues was that once the rules are set, I've got nothing to do to actually support them, right? Like if you look at Crimson Vow, Brothers War, Set Wars, Shadows, and Obi-Wan, once you got the rules set up and the code set up, they just run themselves. Like I don't have to log on and like
Yeah.
fix a bunch of stuff behind the scenes to make things go. They
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
go.
You would have
And
hated being on the
and
committee for AFR, or not even you like not AFR. Sorry, you would have
no,
hated to have been MKM.
MKM.
You,
Yeah, no, I could not be bothered to like. I have so much admiration for the people that actually like were down to sit and like pretend to be some fucking detective and like secretly put clues here and there in the server. Like that could not be me. That was absolutely not what I wanted to be doing with my time.
well, I think the servers, the tournament series is better for having had that experience. But yeah, I don't know. There's not.
I think that league was awesome. Like
Yeah,
I don't want to. I don't want to like. I want to separate like.
admiration for the concept and the design,
And I
and the sort of like let's say hesitation to be
think
part of anything like that ever again, right?
it was
So yeah, I share that admiration and also the reluctance that you expressed to be part of the, let's say, the people pulling the strings behind the theater piece. All right, we were having a little technical difficulty with Caleb, but in the meantime, I want to call out some of the interesting particulars about this league. So, this was the first league where we had Magic Stronghold Games, their first appearance as a partner store. And also, weirdly enough, we had Toy Snowman, Amir's company. He donated a Nicol Bolas plushie to the league winner, which was a pretty cool prize and pretty novel. Face-to-Face Games still here as a sponsor, and of course at that time, We were also partnered with Three Kings Loot. Now we have withdrawn our partnership from that store. But interesting to see that Stronghold is picking up here right at the beginning of Season 2 play. That's sort of like big scale organizational note. But yeah, we're going to get Caleb back here, and then we're going to see about continuing on the rules. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I'll see if I can raise Caleb here. He seems to have dropped off. I know it's hurricane season in some parts of the world, so possibly that could be the cause for the technical glitch. So we had a previous version of this as Caleb intoned, which we lost because we were having difficulty bringing up some of the images. Just for right now, while I'm sort of stalling for time, I will show you, or I'll preview the images that he sent for us to view. One is the Markov family tree, so going from the progenitor all the way through the tournament until the end. This is the Markov family tree, which you can see. He kept these family trees, the images kind of going throughout the league. He added to them week by week, which was kind of cool. And the Volderans, obviously the more successful family, right, with more more generations on the go. Pretty cool, right? That you could kind of follow your actual family tree back through these graphics as the tournament progressed. You could see how your family did historically. So that was something that was really unique and fascinating about that whole thing. I'm going to end the call with Caleb and try to get him back out again here. That might be the best way forward. Let me see.
Chris?
Hey, yeah. I just kept the audience through that little glitch. I kept the audience talking. I talked about the I talked about how we got the Magic Stronghold on board for this league. I talked about how Toy Snowman gave us.
How long was I just not talking for?
That's
I was on some big.
there was
on some big rant about like faction flavor resonance. How long did that?
I think you were out for about 2 minutes, so we got you back now. But I talked about the institutional organizational stuff. I thought you kind of popped back in, but you never did. So I came and found you and restarted the call. I also highlighted the images that you sent around, and I said one of the cool features about the league was that people could actually follow back their family trees because you were very good at like keeping the genealogy updated from week to week. So you could kind of go back and say, this is my vow daddy, right, or my vow mommy. This is who made me into a vampire.
Family tree, yeah, sure.
That was awesome.
There was definitely okay. So if you remember when I was talking about how I didn't want to do things with a bunch of manual maintenance and steps,
yes,
this was the one exception, which is I had this like 30-day free trial for this flowchart software that I used to make these like family trees, and you could sort of see like, okay, Chris. In my case, I was actually the only ever 4th generation vampire.
I saw that.
So Chris beat Justin Pigeon, beat Matt Zed, beat Rowan C, who beat me, and that was how I became a Markov, and wound up on the winning side of the family feud. I think I enjoyed them maybe more than most people. I don't know why. I don't know why this was so fun to me, but I enjoyed it.
No, your enthusiasm is evident in all the graphics and all the spreadsheets and the sort of like mathematical modeling of infection rates prior to the tournament. You could tell that you just loved this idea, and it was very difficult to resist.
Like, in some ways, this was definitely like this is COVID era, right? Like this is 2020, 2021, so that probably had something to do with it. But you can sort of see, like, if you look at the Markov spreadsheet, like, you can see Zeke's got, like, 7 people under him. Zeke wound up winning the side pot for most conversions, in spite of being a Oh, the progenitors were excluded right from that side pot, but he wound up winning the side pot for most conversions. You can see that on the chart. He's got a like big wide fan of people under him because he beat a lot of humans. I guess I don't know if he was deliberately targeting them or not, but it worked out for him.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cody, who won the most successful human to die while still a human, was deliberately aiming for that side pot. Like he deliberately avoided playing vampires for as long as possible and got
Nice.
to 18 wins without losing to a vampire. Um, the Vampire Slayer, yeah, I like all the side pots. There's the Vampire Slayer Award, which went to John, the podcast man, Goku or Go Home, who eliminated who killed oh no who had 9 victories against other vampires while able they ran.
And
So
he doesn't put
the
that
human
in the lead into Hunt the Week. He doesn't mention that side pot victory. I don't know why. It should be there in his accolades, right?
Yeah, I mean look, that's 2 buy-ins for future leagues right there. Like the side pots were they were meaningful. I think we hit the right number on that, what it's worth.
Me too.
But the bit that I sort of was spouting off about while our audio cut out was that I think we kind of suffered because Markovs and Bolderans weren't particularly resonant to people's faction identities. Like,
Right.
if you compare to Strixhaven, people in Quandrix got to like make a bunch of math jokes and like post spreadsheets at people. And like when I would post my stats spreadsheet for like a year after or more, people would respond with like the Quandrix emote and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because people, like most of us, I think, went to college of some kind or another.
Right.
But when we went to like SNC, for instance, very few of us have been in a mafia or any other sort of
Yeah.
criminal.
Surprisingly few.
Yeah, surprisingly. So that was a lot less. And like Marcos and Molderans, we have not been a part of immortal vampire families that subvert traditional power structures and are a metaphor for the aristocracy. So there, if you were a Markov and you wanted to like chirp the Volderans, there wasn't much you could actually point at beyond the fact that you guys were winning the league side pot.
Right.
So there wasn't quite like there's a hook to the set flavor. It wasn't the hook to like real life that I think people kind of enjoyed with the very best of the faction set flavors. Like even cons had a bit more of this, right? Like the Mardu got to all joke about like playing their matches quickly and stuff
Right.
like that. And the teamer, we just posted pictures of bears over and over. Like it's not the greatest in the world,
Yeah.
but it's still more
Bear
than
posting,
nothing,
right? That was the.
yeah, bear post. Yeah, the bear posting channel. I was proud of that one. But well, I assume you'll have someone more relevant on for cons. But yeah, shout out bear posting.
Yeah. So I guess that
Yeah.
I was ragging on Cons of Tarkir for not being, mechanically ambitious enough or even flavorfully resonant, but it did have its moments of camaraderie that kind of shone through, I suppose.
Definitely the most bears per capita of any of the leagues we've done so far. So I think that's got to rank it high on my list.
That's fair, but by that metric, it's the most successful league ever. By that very
You're right.
particular metric. All right, so now, oh sorry, you wanted to add?
So I realized also in the bit that I got lost was me ranting about how cons is an overrated by paper boomers and not actually a good limited format. But we can leave that where it belongs.
That's fair enough. We'll save that for the cons retrospective. Hey, you know what? We're going back to Tarkir. You realize that?
Wait, really?
Yeah,
They announced
that's one of the sets on our horizon that we're already having to sort of.
They're doing Return to Lorwyn too, right?
Yes, they are.
I'm extremely hyped for Return to Lorwyn. I hope they make all the cards as weird and fiddly as they were the first time around.
Yeah.
If you ever see you have this experience, right? Like you're playing like Commander or something. Someone plays a card you've never heard of that does some complete nonsense. You're like, where the hell is this from? It's from like Morning Tide, inevitably, or some one of those sets.
I remember one of the cards was like Noggin Whack or something. It had one of those classic comic images of someone getting hit in the head by a fish, and I really appreciated that. I mean, you don't see that in many Magic sets.
Yeah, I can't believe they gave us Bloomburrow with like the gift of fish mechanic, and they didn't have you hitting anybody with the fish.
Right.
Like that's such a missed opportunity. I'm looking up the Noggin Whack art right now, and it is as good as you've described. I think everybody listening at home should go look up Noggin Whack. It has a prowl cost, so you know it's good.
I used to have this set of cards actually that were old like classic like 1930s comic book covers, and there were a surprising number of people getting hit by fish on the covers of those comics, and I'm pretty sure that was a knowing callback to that genre of like action detective kind of like or like woodsman kind of attacking each other with fish. It was a bizarre sort of genre of cover art.
I wonder if it's some like symptom of everybody who wrote comics living in like New York, where like they have fish because they're by the ocean. Like if everyone in comics is in Chicago, I guess they got fish in Chicago. But if they're in like Texas or something, they probably don't have fish as
Maybe.
much.
I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, maybe. Who's to say?
But in any case, yeah. So we're returning to cons, and maybe they'll do it right this time by
Maybe we
your
should
lights.
return to Val. Is that we're meant to be talking? It's been a while.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, here's sort of how we're using. So it's kind of timely that we're discussing Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow now because we're using all the spooky sets for Duskmorn, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to see a bit of a resurgence of these card sets. We talked a little bit about the gameplay. We talked a little bit about how the mechanics worked out. One thing that we haven't discussed, and we should before we put a lid on this casket, is how we might do this differently this time around if we did revisit Crimson Vow. Do you have any ideas about how you do things differently? If you, or did we just hit it perfectly on the head the first time?
I think the only thing I would change would be to have the conversion from human to vampire happen as soon as you lost the match to the vampire you were playing. The delayed conversion thing I think was confusing to people, and it was just a technical limitation.
Right.
I forget if that discussion was included in the bit that got edited out or not.
No, we did. That was there.
Okay. I think, honestly, and I have a soft spot for it because it was my idea, I think in terms of having the mechanic fit the set, it was as good a fit as any. In terms of the mechanic itself, I think, enjoy faction leagues, and I still think if we tried to do it now, I suspect the current league committee would add on something additional that affected the league gameplay experience beyond being a part of a faction. And my taste has always been for simpler mechanics. Like, I think there's a couple leagues that we've run that would have benefited substantially from cutting the worst of the mechanics that were presented.
You're talking about Outlaws of Thunder
Vow.
Junction, right?
Like whichever league where you could like fully trade your pool with someone else's, like that was a rough one. OTG I think was actually worked pretty cohesively to be a good. Like, I was skeptical on the gambling at first, but I think it actually worked because it got sort of fed into the store league thing, and that was the one path through which all this other stuff actually affected gameplay. So it kind of got. There was a bunch of stuff that you could choose to engage in or not, but it all kind of got routed through this one really good idea. Like the store idea was phenomenal, and credit to, like, I know it was floating around even when I was on the league. It was floating around for a while, but credit to the people who actually made it work, because the execution there, they got all the details right, and the idea itself was great. I've got nothing but praise for it, but.
Yeah, I think that the store was done right. The free market worked perfectly.
My take has always been on the simpler side. Like, if you look at the leagues that I was involved with, I think very few of them take more than like 2 bullet points to explain.
Elevator pitch. They're elevator pitchable.
Yeah. Whereas, the people writing loot tables and like putting prices on packs to buy, they've got different things they want to do. And if you look at the ones I did, this one Vow kind of stands out as being the one where I like actually had a good mechanic to league fit. Like Brothers War, All Will Be One, and Shadows of Innistrad. Like, those mechanics kind of could have gone on most about any sets, right? Like, you get to re-roll something or other, or pick between 2 packs. Like, that's nothing terribly special about Brothers War that says that has to be the league where you introduce that mechanic.
Yeah. So flavor fit, I agree, was really good here. In terms of like the vanilla to complex spectrum or continuum, I think that my taste probably is somewhere in the middle, or maybe one nudge over to the complex side. I guess because we've had so many. We started out with so many vanilla leagues. Like, if you look at the back catalog of leagues behind, there are so many leagues where I'm just talking to people and we're like, this wasn't
do like during the podcast, for which I haven't listened to, but like if you're podcasting on like Call Time or something, um, where, as far as I recall, there was no mechanic. What did you talk about for 30 minutes?
Oh, you'd be surprised. There's lots of people want to tell stories either from their own contributions to the design or their engagement with the set or the tournament or just what was happening at the time in the league. So it's been like a time capsule that we're
I will
creating.
admit, Call Time, I think that's the one where you tell the story where Jesse moves to Finland, which I think is actually the single greatest league story of all time. Has that been told on this podcast?
It has not, but now is a good enough time to tell. I mean, people have been, increasingly meeting up with each other in real life. And yeah, as you pointed out, like Jesse found Francesco and Tia on the server, and then I think they maybe helped hook him up with a job, and he actually moved to Finland to take on that job.
Yeah,
And
no, he still lives in Finland. I mean, I haven't talked to him in a year or two because he tends to drop off and pop back onto the server now and then. But
yeah,
Call Time was the peak of the Finnish domination era of the league, where Tia won. Well, like Tia
heavily
won the league,
pregnant,
and Francesco also top eighted. Sorry.
heavily pregnant.
Yeah, Tia won the league. Like by the time I tell the story, you're like 5 years from now, she's gonna have won the league while in labor or something. But yeah, Tia won the league, and Francesco top eighted, and those were our two Finnish representatives. And Jesse was like, "Hey, these people are pretty cool." As far as I understand, he was like, "These people are pretty cool. I'm gonna move to Finland?" Question mark from America. Which like I'm my understanding is I talked to Jesse about this a couple of times. Like people mostly speak English. Like you seem to be pretty happy out there, but like it's a kind of wild thing to do. Oh,
Yeah, we've
like,
changed some lives, and I mean with AGL Con.
like, I don't think anything else has come close to doing
Come
that.
on,
Like until like two people get married off this league or something, that's where we're gonna peak, right? Like that's the only thing that would one up it for me.
I don't know. I think Richard's road trips throughout America, dropping in on people from the league, are pretty
Like
epic.
then he goes back to Montreal, right? Like
True.
AGL Con was cool. Like don't get me wrong, but then everyone went home at the end, right? Like and it was fun, but then you go home. But like moving, that's pretty permanent.
It is. It is. Um, all right. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps up our look back at Crimson Vow. I might call it. Look, if you thought this went all right, Caleb, can I call you back for one of your other offerings later on down the
I want
line?
to come back for Brothers War. Like that's the other one. I feel like, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I felt involved in like 4 or 5 leagues. Actually, you might have me on for Set Wars. I was
Okay.
involved in like the design of 4 or 5 leagues. Crimson Vow and Brothers War, I think, were my two good ideas, and the other ones were like a tear down. If I got to admit.
You want to distance yourself from those offerings? Okay, fair enough.
No, no, like I'll own them, but like I think Avow and Brothers were like those are the ones I'm still proud of now. The other ones I'll talk about if you need me on there to fill the space, but I don't feel quite as warmly about them as I do about those two.
Well, Caleb, thanks for looking back with me on Crimson Vow. I hope you have a spooky Halloween. And I want to thank you for all your contributions, not only to this set design, but to the several others that you heavily contributed to. Obviously, you're a titan of our community, and yeah, you're missed around the shop.
It's I enjoyed my time on the league committee, but and it's fun looking back on it. But I feel good about when I chose to step back, and uh, and I'm happy to see how much further people have pushed it. Like it's been really cool. Like even the statue I'm looking at now that Jax took over from me after I handed it off. Right,
Hmm.
it's so much better than it was when I was running things. Like you got no idea. Although he, um, yeah, no, it's really cool to see.
Well, let's keep watching it together. I'm also interested to see where we go next, and I'll have a hand in where we go for Foundations, aka Plane Chase 2. So that'll be kind of one of my babies that I've been.
Oh, you're running back the plane chase idea for foundations?
Yeah, it's a
Oh, that'll
course
be sick.
it's a core set, right? So it needs a lot of
Yeah,
dolling up to make it palatable to our enfranchised player base. So we're gonna take it back to the planes.
I like you know what, Plane Chase I like a lot, as a league structure, and I'm happy it's coming back. So this is good news for me.
Great, Caleb. Thanks again for all your time and everything. Take good care, and we'll see you back here again soon.
See you, Chris.
Later, man.